It can come across as arrogance, but I think it's so important that you have a clear position to say, I have something of value to offer you.
Hello and welcome to the Business of Architecture. I'm your host, Rion Willard, and today I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Andy Bigwood, a partner at Ridge & Partners. He has a profound focus on leading and facilitating client and design team collaborations. Andy is dedicated to uncovering, designing, and delivering quality projects that make a positive difference to the spaces where we live, work, and learn. Previously, Andy worked at Foster & Partners, where he was an associate partner, and he was also the head of contracts and business development at Heatherwick Studio for about 4 years. He originally trained in mechanical engineering, and then Andy received an MBA from Bristol University, and he migrated into working with architecture practices, where he developed a specialism around contract negotiations, client acquisition, and the mechanisms needed to elevate a practice into profit and growth. With a wealth of experience in business development and design leadership, Andy imparts invaluable tips and insights to help architects and design professionals win more work and grow their businesses to reach their potential. This episode is filled with golden gems, so make sure that you listen to it more than once. We talk about the secrets behind how signature brand firms like Norman Foster, Foster & Partners, and Heatherwick negotiate contracts and win work. We look at the risks that all architecture practices face with new clients and the temptation of doing free work and competitions and the risks that are involved. And we also look at what the large practices do to get paid on time and the challenges that they face. So lots of really interesting deep insights into the world of larger architecture practice firms. Here, sit back, relax, and enjoy Andy Bigwood. It's time to announce this month's 200 Club. If you missed our episode on the 200 Club, listen to Business of Architecture episode 485 to learn more about this new initiative for benchmarking small firm performance. So big congratulations to Drew and Justine Tyndall, Kimberly Dokes, Daniela Espana, and Newan Ranasingh, Mark Elster, Charles Scram, Irini Adams, Chris Brandon, Brad Hubble, Marina Rubina, Yogesh Mistry, Andrea Nemechek, Denise Burkett and Jos Bende, Chris Rawlings, Jorge Catran, Lina Bola, Judy and Larry Apel, Kelly Morgan, David and Kristen Ware, and George Aguirres. Great job to everyone who's made it into the 200 Club this month. Keep up the fantastic work. This podcast is produced by Business of Architecture, a leading business consultancy for architects and design professionals. This episode is sponsored by Smart Practice, Business of Architecture's flagship program to help you structure your firm for freedom, fulfillment, and financial profit. If you want access for our free training on how to do this, please visit smartpracticemethod.com. Or if you want to speak directly to one of our advisors about how he might be able to help you, please follow the link in the information. Hello, listeners. We hope you're enjoying our show. We love bringing you these insightful conversations, but we couldn't do it without the support of our amazing sponsors. If you're a business owner or know someone who would be an excellent fit for our audience, we'd love to hear from you. Partnering with us means your brand will reach over 40,000 engaged listeners each month. Interested in becoming a sponsor? Please send us an email at support@businessofarchitecture.com. Hello, Andy. Welcome to the Business of Architecture. How are you?
Very good. Hello, Ryan. Very
Excellent. Good to be speaking with you. Now, you've had a very interesting career. You were previously a associate partner at Foster's and Partner, and more recently, you are one of the partners at Ridge & Partners, and have developed a very interesting career specialism, practice strategy, development, design management, and actually very active in client acquisition and helping and making sure that the business is actually winning work. So perhaps we can talk a little bit about Ridge & Partners and your current role there and how you got to be in the position that you're in.
Sure. No, it's great to talk to you more. And so I've been at Ridge & Partners for about a year and a half now, just over that, I think. So I joined after spending some time at Foster's, where I was there for 2 years. Previous to that, I did actually spend about 5 years at Heatherwick Studio as well, heading up their head of business development. and the commercial team. And previous to that, it was about 8 years at Foster's. So over 20 years in this area of architecture with some quite signature practices, clearly. The interesting thing at Ridge was Ridge itself is now just in the AJ 100 this year has got to position 38. Last year was at 62. So it's been getting up the rankings. And that's been fascinating just to see how that progress has happened in the last year. Ridge has got over 1,100 people. It's a multidisciplinary practice. So with project managers, engineers, architects. And that in itself was an interesting, rather than a solely architecture focused practice. And I came across to Ridge. I'm based in London. Someone I worked with at Foster's came across, and there was an opportunity to build a London team. And there's a wider team of architects across the practice, which is 130 now. So it's a big practice of architects as well as the multidisciplinary. And the real challenge and the interesting bit for me was growing a London team, focusing on design, focusing on really high quality work, and gaining all the nuggets and information from previous practices like Foster's and Heatherwick, and also having it as arguably a non-signature practice and what the different challenges are there and differences compared to a highly branded, something like a Foster's, which is very well known over the last 50 years, 45 years, and has built that profile. So, yeah.
So very interesting in your background. Obviously, you're not a architect in the traditional sense, that you've worked intimately in architecture practices for the majority of your career. You've got a degree in, is it mechanical engineering?
That's correct.
And
yes.
And real estate and finance as well, or economics?
That's right, yeah. And that was not a degree, it was a short course at LSE. And,
right.
But just trying to get awareness about.
Gotcha. Okay. And so the position that you've been doing in Foster's Partners Heatherwick's, can you talk a little bit about what you were helping these practices do? How would you describe what your role was?
So very much, largely at Foster's, it was a project management role. So, and focusing on business development, commercial and contract negotiation, and also setting the projects up. So a lot of focus at the front end, winning the work, negotiating, and also building the right team for the specific opportunity, and making sure that the project was set up as best it could be to deliver and protect the architecture teams, but also engineering teams, because it was often a multidisciplinary offer. Now, whether that was leading by Foster's with a sub-consultant of a big engineering firm like WSP, for example. So it was making sure the different facets of the business side in terms of fees, contracts, terms and programs, and the delivery was set up in the best possible way so the architect team was protected. And also, once the contract was signed, leading into design management, so leading and working with the client teams and the architect teams to make sure there was enough, the whole project was set up properly and there was the right degree of client decision making. If there was issues, sorting out additional fees, sorting out changes of briefs, things like that, which I think what's interesting, it does span and scale, from the smallest practice to the largest practice. It's the same formula of tools and systems to protect the firm. There's obviously different people involved, different stakeholders, different locations. I think that was a fascinating thing at Foster's and Heatherwick. You were dealing with all sorts of cultures globally. So it was could be Japan, could be over in Tokyo one day, and then the next day it was Google in Mountain View. So there's a whole breadth of clients. But I think distilling it down, there's the same tools to get through to get a safe contract sorted out with the right fee levels, and also making sure you've got the right protections in place. Sorry.
I was going to say, what sorts of things are you doing to ensure the safety of a contract? What kinds of mistakes would be kind of very serious for these practices to make, and also how do you make sure that the fees are correct. We kind of assume with practices like Heatherwick's or Foster's, that, like you're saying, their signature name practices, one would expect the clients are kind of approaching them and that they're able to charge a kind of premium on their fees comparatively to other practices. I don't know whether that's the truth, but that's what the outside perspective is often.
I think it depends on the situation and the market, and it does vary. I think it's fair to say there's you definitely have a stronger hand if you've got a strong brand and the client wants to work with you. But there's, most of these large scale signature sort of big cultural projects are won through competitions, and often you have to put a lot of skin in the game to start off with, which I think is one of the things I'm fascinated by, how that's set up. And architects do get a raw deal often at the start, where they have to do a lot of free work. They have to which is easier for people with deeper pockets like these more successful firms, which is harder for smaller firms, clearly, who don't have that and don't have. So I think, and the more and more you see, these firms do have, if you're in a competition situation, the terms of procurement are set out from the start, and they're quite difficult. You just have to maybe have a bigger war chest, in a sense, to put some money in to invest in these competitions. But then behind the scenes, you can talk to people and try and build different streams of reputation in the area, in the geography, to help. But also, I think Foster's have done it very well over the years in terms of building a sort of reputation in terms of they can deliver, they will deliver, and they will take on sort of ambitious projects and give there's a whole back catalogue of obviously case studies to show they can do that. So it puts you in a very strong position. I think in terms of, the detail in terms of terms and conditions, I think fundamentally you're trying to secure payment and make sure you do get the best payment terms possible. Now, whether that's an upfront advance payment. Now, as I say, in a competition situation, you can't always do that. You have to just try and win the competition. But in other direct appointments, or when you're in a more competitive situation in terms of you're not doing a design competition but submitting a proposal or a request for proposal, you can then often dictate your terms and come to a middle ground. And I think it's just about being reasonable and talking to the client about explaining really carefully your team, your resources you'll have to expend, how you work, and obviously why should you work for free. And I think that's the crazy thing in the industry, which seems to be often in those early stages, it's just given, it's completely reasonable for an architect to work for free, which is, if you went to a lawyer or went to an accountant, went to any other professional service provider, they'd be like, what are you talking about? And I think architects generally, we can help in terms of putting forward the case to say, well, that's not reasonable. And I always try and get to that position of, and I think it comes back to also building a really strong relationship with the client and the client's team, and mapping out who the key decision makers are, who the, not roadblocks, but who the people you have to get in front of and what their process is. So I think even before putting a proposal on, it's sort of backing up and just thinking, well, okay, what's the process of client sign off? Because often you do find you get through maybe one proposal situation and then you get to the next round and then the fees get negotiated and negotiated and negotiated. So I think in those upfront conversations, just having a really honest conversation, an open conversation about what the process is, can help a lot, and not assume anything. And obviously and I think I was trying to list out some of the traits of where I think people are successful versus not successful. I think having this self-confidence and belief, it can come across as arrogance, but I think it's so important that you have a clear position to say, I have something of value to offer you, whichever size, scale, type of firm you are. And really make it clear why that is. And there's different techniques I think you can apply to different sectors, for example. But I think I see that in the larger teams, even from an early stage. I think Norman Foster was very confident and a very clear communicator to explain, this is the value add I offer, and it clearly showed it afterwards quite quickly. And there's some I was thinking back to some of the examples in the early days when they didn't have the brand. They still showed and almost over delivered the on what they could offer from it, and it also surprised the client. I think if you can get in a situation where you're face to face to the client, having those one-on-one conversations, it might be you've built that relationship before they even were going through a formal, commercial proposal or tender process, procurement process, and you've built a relationship up before. And I see that day in, day out now. The successful architects do that. They're pre-positioning, they're building relationships with these key clients they're targeting and building that. And it may involve a little bit of free work, but it leads on to saying, okay, I've shown you I can deliver for you. I've shown you I can solve your problems. And then it's not a conversation about, well, why should I choose you over that firm? I know you're delivering for me. I know. And then when you overlay that over time with good experience, with delivered projects and a back catalogue of great, building that portfolio is obviously super important. How
do you qualify a client? I recall conversations when I was at RSHP. The suspicion sometimes of a certain client where they've just approached a big name practice, and it could be quite exciting and intoxicating at first, some big project in some exotic location. But then there was always sometimes, hold on a minute, is this a project that's actually going to take off? They're asking us to, are we going to do free work for this person? How do we know that they're legit? How do you qualify a client to make sure that they're who and what they say they are? Because even at the larger commercial scales, it's still, sometimes we kind of come across this in smaller projects, but even at larger commercial scales, there's still things which aren't appear what they are, and also competitions as well.
Definitely, no, I think, and that's the challenges. I think you've almost got you can ask some very careful questions at the start. I think always building the open questions and having a script of predetermined questions to try and analyze what the project type is, almost what it is, who the authority is, trying to ask the questions about that process, trying to understand about their funding structures, and not say it's a problem, but just have an open conversation. I think you can be, if they're professional and you're professional, you can get that captured. If you can't, if you're having problems trying to understand that, there's some alarm bells should be ringing. But equally, there's no harm in saying no to opportunities. And I think, that's probably is the biggest strength. Some of these, it's a tricky balance when you've got large teams, and this is where you get into a challenge of bigger and bigger companies where you've got mouths to feed, and almost the sort of go no go decisions sometimes reduces down because you just need to get work in. So I think the lens is different, but at my experience of when it goes well, you should really focus on it's about the client, but it's also about you. Do you really want to work on these projects? And think carefully about why. I like to talk about, maybe the head of a company, their decision to do it, but then also the partner in charge. Would they love to do this project or not? And have two keys to turn rather than just one founder saying, yeah, we're doing all these projects, throwing it over the fence, and then it just carries on in terms of, and then you get a disgruntled team because you're constantly doing work you're not necessarily invested in and you want to do. And that happens, I think, with scale as well. And I think on the smaller practices, you've got more opportunity probably to develop that personal go, no go question about, is this the portfolio I want to be building? Does this project fit in it properly? Now, that's a slightly different thing, but I think we do have more control than we think about taking on the projects we want to. And arguably, you can have more success once you determine your own portfolio, which again can scale from an individual architect up to big architectural teams, but and largely focused on sector. But I think you're completely right in terms of some of the bigger, higher profile conversations are more difficult in terms of checking if that client has the money at the right time to pay you. And fundamentally, you need to do some tests like that. Maybe you can limit your risk by saying, we'll do a start. I see more and more, there's a lot of firms who will do an individual stage, do sort of a I suppose, before you even get into concept design, a short piece of work, working out is the brief right. And that can be quite an agile way of starting a project where you're lowering your risk, because you can often secure that quite quickly. The client can sign it off quickly. You can really test if they're serious or not. You can see, do you want to keep working with them? And I think that is something we can position carefully with clients and negotiate quickly. You maybe don't get that much fees then, but that's fine, because you're really trying to build the relationship with them, let them build a relationship with you, and have that equal relationship. And then during that time, you can secure and work, because sometimes these bigger projects are quite complex to work out. So durations, the actual stakeholder sign-off process, the planning process, what sort of sustainability targets are you going to focus on? And there's a lot of education in those early stages, I think, and educating the client. So, but ultimately the acid test is, clearly, do they pay you, and do they pay you on time? And that's fundamental. And I think, not assuming they're going to pay you, and then positioning it, not being afraid to say, well, I want to get paid up front, paid in monthly amounts. And then obviously maybe it needs to be a success fee if there's certain things which are restricted on the client's funding releases. But I do see it at the highest level. You get challenges with payments at the not the lowest level, but any scale can be difficult. So I think the more you sort of look at this is like just having really clear and open communication and saying, well, not being afraid to say, this is why we need this payment plan. And often you do get into resourcing requirements, and once clients understand that, I think there's clarity. But you're trying to de-risk this a lot of the time for the client, who doesn't always know, that he's coming often to you as the expert or the team of experts delivering this quite technical, risky service. And I think that's a fascinating thing, when you're always putting yourself in the client's sort of chair and thinking about, well, what's he up against? How can you make him look good, and that individual, and then the client look good? And often, if there is a problem with their funding, they might, often can happen with developers. So you have an honest and open conversation about that, and just say, well, you need to pay us, but let's work out a proper payment plan. And then so limiting your risks on testing if they're serious or not.
Yeah.
But I think as soon as you go down the line, and it clearly happens with developers a lot, we're not going to pay you until you get planning, or we'll pay you on a success fee structure, which is all risk on the architecture team, which is clearly quite challenging. But it may be worth it for the right opportunity, and I think that's where. Well, that's where it's at, don't you? Yeah,
that's where it becomes interesting, because obviously, getting paid on a success fee for, we have a lot of clients at Business of Architecture where, it doesn't work if the developer is suddenly imposing this time frame on you when you hadn't agreed it up front. But if there's a negotiation up front where an architect says, okay, I'll take the risk of getting paid after planning approvals, but in order for me to take that risk, then there's got to be a healthy bonus or uplift in my fees as a result. Okay, great. Well, then now the architect can choose to share in the risk and get rewarded for it, as opposed to just being forced to take on risk. You make an agreement for a certain amount of fees, and then what's your reward for taking on risk? Is, well, you get paid what you said you agreed on, but it's just 6 months late. And that doesn't work.
Completely. And completely. And I think, again, having that open conversation and being curious about how that client or whoever's running the funding model in a development situation, how that's going to work. And trying to get an equal balance of risk and return. I think it's one of the games, isn't it, of this? I think for me, I look at it, let's try it as a bit of a puzzle. Let's work out how you can get the best deal for you and them. And then there's a way forward potentially, but you do have to say no sometimes and say, this isn't going to work out, and move on quickly. And that's probably in that, like I said, design, in the go, no-go situation, saying no is more important than saying yes, actually, and knowing when you do say no and when the red lines are.
What kinds of questions would you be asking, let's say, a developer client about their funding model and what sorts of answers would be giving, what sorts of things, what questions would you be asking, and what kinds of things would you be looking out for that could be potential red flags that might mean payment might be hindered, or you might be taking on a bit more risk than you anticipated?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and I think often the big milestones are for developers when you get to planning. Clearly, that's when it de-risks massively. And quite often developers at that point, these early stage developers, will get their money out, or most of their money out at that point, and maybe open out to wider investment pools. So understanding if that's their exit strategy, or if and then there's obviously probably they'll stay involved until the point of construction delivery, and then that might be when they get all their money out. So it's maybe for them a timeline of maybe 4 years, but a lot of the risk is reduced at the point when you get planning. So, but clearly that could take a while for a big development. If you're working for, say, 3, 4, 5 months to get up to planning, maybe, and then there's a window until planning success has occurred, when it's determined, that could take another period of maybe 6 months. So that could be a year of working at quite challenging rates. But again, we shouldn't go in lightly. We should really just think about those risks and then be realistic about it. Is it right for us? Can we support that process if you don't get planning, and what happens then, and think about the worst case scenario. But then if there's an upside, so often it's, let's cover maybe the costs of a team, still try and secure that, and try and be realistic. And this is where I think having external planning consultants can be really useful to map out in that location so it's an independent sort of verification of the program. It's not the client's best case, we're going to get planning in 6 months, or it's not yours saying, well, I need all this time to do the design. It's a sort of independent, and then you be realistic. But the upside to the developer is clearly a lot more often than the architect, and once they get that value, they could sell it after planning. And then I think those are the questions which are quite important, and they may not tell you, but you can look from their previous, do a bit of research behind the scenes. What do they typically do to their developments? Do they hold it? And some will, but often I think in those early stages, once they get planning, or once they get a bit later on, they will bring in pension fund investors or bigger scale investors who will be there for the longer term, and that'll be their investment timeline. And I think it's not a problem if that current developer wants to get out. I suppose it's just making sure once you understand that and you've mapped it through, make sure then it works for you financially. And it's and even, as I say, the worst case scenario, if you don't get planning, are you okay with that situation? And you'd be able to offset it against other opportunities you're working on. And I
guess in some cases there might be a change of client even, or like if a developer was selling it post planning to another developer who's going to take on the actual construction of the build, then does the architect then wants to kind of negotiate some kind of clause in the contract to make sure that they get retained on for the project? Do you ever see that kind of situation coming up?
Again, it sort of depends. And this is where I think people with very strong brand signature firms have more strength there, because then you can say they want a X design building, and you can stay involved. I think if you can try, and you can obviously have some wording in there, but it's normally it can happen. But I think if that is one of the challenges to going with open eyes, I think they can still terminate a contract and go to someone else. I think another pressure which is coming recently is the rise of design and build contracts, and clients going to contractors earlier, and at that point in the UK, you have obviously sort of normally after stage 3, potentially could go to a design and build contract and the design and build contractor doesn't want the architect involved and goes to their own preferred architect to deliver the service. So then you could get cut out then if you're not careful. And I think it's an interesting one. I mean, I think as ever, you've got to prove your value all the way through. And if you're offering great value, you're offering solving problems, even in those later stages for contractors, I think you can win and you can keep going. But it's certainly a risk, and I think it happens internationally as well as in the UK. They'll buy the name, especially. Well, maybe it's more common in the Far East. How you protect yourself, maybe just upfront the fees and really charge more in those early stages. And then if you do get cut out, it's not such a big risk. You've made more money to counter that, so you could keep the team going. But it's certainly a challenge. I think we've got to acknowledge it's difficult. Building stuff and getting paid is difficult anyway. And then if it's a really exceptional project, it's arguably more difficult. And the full testament to people who can keep going with these, if it's your own design practice or you're working within a bigger practice, it is difficult. And I think this is where I'm fascinated with the sort of, you've just got to have that relentless resilience and be able to keep going. And from a mental health point of view, it's hard. And I think building a team around you who can really support you is fundamental. Really being careful about, the balance of, I sort of look at it, financially, are you making enough money for your practice? That's difficult. Then there's also, have you got the right work-life balance? That's challenging for architecture, especially. And you should, working all hours, you might be making loads of money in projects in the Middle East, but have you got a home life balance? Are you seeing your kids? Are you seeing your family? It's a challenge and a tension. And then the third area, are you actually doing projects which are meaningful to you? And at the end of your life, will you look back and think, oh, I'm so proud of that portfolio? So I think it's interesting to get sucked along with just making money for the practice. And then after 10 years, maybe you think, well, was that worth it? All that pain and whatever, divorces or, not seeing my kids as they're growing up. And so I think for me, you want to have that well-rounded situation. It's a bit of a wider concept, but more and more it's becoming, because I've got a young daughter who's now 10, and you think, well, so those moments you could miss by working all hours is not really what life's about. Clearly, you want to have a full and interesting work, but it should be balanced with your home life. And then, like I say, this meaningful portfolio conversation. It's not easy, but actually, I think if you deeply think about what projects I want to make a difference to, not just chasing after the money. I think that doesn't necessarily, it works for some people, but I think especially in this wider societal challenge where we've got climate change, bless you, where we've got societal challenges of climate change, the extreme differences between rich and poor, and some of the big structural societal challenges we've got, how we address those. Plus, there's the underline of just developing projects and doing great design work, but in the realms of this whole thing, we should be using less materials or being more careful with what we're designing. It sort of really focuses your mind on what is the right portfolio of projects moving forward. And I think having time to actually think about that, and really then trying to watch your personal health about not burning out, and then building a team to share the responsibilities is so important. And then you might survive for a few years, but actually you need to have that great team around you for longevity and to keep smashing, and delivering and doing all the great stuff which you can. And I think after a while, burnout becomes, if you're not careful, just happens, and it's so sad. Whereas if you can set up the practice at the start to really, look after yourself, and we're not gonna win every job we go for. So then it's like, how do we process mentally? Not feel too bad about not winning, but thinking about all the benefits there. And obviously, did we put every effort we could have done on that situation in time to secure that project? Did we learn something along the way? Did we improve along the way? Those sorts of situations, and looking at the effort was 100% or more. We didn't win, but there's factors why we didn't win. So we can take on board for the next, and almost like training hard and going again, and not being mentally getting too tied up with, oh, we failed again. We didn't win. Clearly there was, because I think what's interesting is if you keep positive in a relationship with that situation, those clients you built up, quite often they will come back to you for the next one or the next opportunity they have. And it's not the end. or you've learned so much about their problems through that process, you can then pivot and apply it to another situation with a similar typology of client.
It's knowledge that starts to compound.
I think so. I mean, it's just I'm not sure. I think I lost the question there, but the general sort of idea of trying to look after yourself and then look after your team, I think, is another area which in architecture, especially in the last 20 years, I don't think it's necessarily been given enough focus. And actually, the whole situation where architects have been paid a salary, but the expectation or the demands require overtime working. It's just, and it becomes a culture then, and almost a bravado to keep going the latest.
Yeah,
I think you can get a better balance in life, which is some thoughts I've got recently.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And the kind of negotiating of the fees in the contract and being very selective with who it is that you're working for, and making sure that you're able to tick the work-life balance parts of it, as well as being able to ensure that you're getting decent fees from the work as well, so you can sustain yourself in a healthy manner and not be kind of killing yourself doing something for low fees, or killing yourself doing something for high fees where there's no substance to the project, or you're doing things which are diminishing your own values, because all of that, like you say, is going to end up just causing mental health problems, stress, overwhelm, and burnout. I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of competitions and the risk of competitions. I've seen on the inside, I've been part of many competition entries in my career. When I was working at RSHP, they had like a constant competition team that was on rotation. I assume Foster's and Heatherwick have the same kind of structure, where they've got deep pockets. They have the ability to be able to enter lots and lots of competitions, and they only need to win one or two of them a year for it to kind of pay for all of the work that they're doing in other competitions. What kinds of risks do competitions pose, and how do you make sure that the competition that you're engaging in is going to be, A, it's legit, B, that it's, is there some sort of strategy that you've got in place if you don't win, i.e., that it's going to give you some exposure, or there's some marketing collateral that's produced, and I think kind of see, how do you mitigate, certainly as with smaller practices, how do you kind of mitigate the amount that you input into it? Because it's very easy to kind of get into a culture of just throw everything at a competition. We saw I think the Guggenheim in Helsinki project was pretty disturbing in terms of the amount of resource that it produced from 1,000 or so practices, many of these small practices. And then we have Asif Khan winning it and doing extraordinary work, taking it through to that second stage, only for the project to suddenly disappear. And there's an enormous amount of investment there from a young practice, and for the project just didn't have any. It was very precarious in the first place. There's an enormous amount of risk for architects when they're entering into competitions. How do you see kind of, what sorts of alarm bells would there be for you in terms of which competitions to enter and which ones to stay away from?
No, makes sense. If you can avoid them on total, I think that'd be great. And if you can have direct conversations clearly, but even and it's clear there are benefits. And I do debate this with various people about this quite a lot. And it's, you also, like you say, weighing up is it for portfolio building? Even if you don't win, what does it give you? Does it get you onto a new stage in front of a new group of clients? Is it the only way to break into that sector or that client base? And it could well be a launch to a new platform or project. So I think having a solid financial pipeline is important as well. And even I think Foster and Heatherwick wouldn't go for every single competition. It was very selective. It was very carefully thought through. And often it was like do we have a genuine chance in winning this? Is there something? Have we had, very often the clients will come to various firms and talk to them about, and invite them. So is it an invited competition? And weigh up the numbers. You see, like those examples, or there was one I saw in Cambridge for the Civic Centre the other day, or earlier last year, which we turned down, which had something like 120 people going to the site visit. And it's like, okay, there's 120 people. There must be, the element of just risk, or probability is you're not going to get selected because it's not worth it. There's one for the British Museum out at the moment, which again, and there's an interiors at the V&A, which all amazing projects, but you do have to sort of think, well, there's loads of great design firms out there. Honestly, do we have a way in? Why are we different? And I think what was quite nice, actually, if you can get a room together of critical people who haven't got a vested interest in that specific project, where maybe it's their hometown or it's they were dying, sell their granny to do that project, having some different lenses, like reputationally, someone from the comms team, for example, finance, for someone from what are our studio finances like? Can we afford to do this competition? You can maybe budget in the start of the year for a number of, because there will be some probably, and then weigh up with the other design partners. Is this the right opportunity for us versus their one? There may be a bit of a horse trade in terms of who's right in the situation, and be just objective, and business development and contracts can look at it from the lens of what are the risks? Are we going to gain from it from a commercial fee point of view? Is it really worth the investment at the start? Some of them aren't, as I say, and they can stop. Like any project can stop clearly, but competitions, especially public, big ones, it almost, for me, sometimes I'm quite cynical about it. It always seems like it's a big fashion show in a sense to show off a good competition, and it's actually arguably the competition organisers who are winning best out of this because they get promoted so much.
It's a marketing event.
It seems like it, and I think procurement itself could be done differently. So I think probably stepping back from, we can't always change how that happens, and it's avoiding doing them in the first place by building, for example, and asking those tough questions. What are you trying to get out of it? Is there a place where there's not everyone, the herd is not flocking to that area or herding to that area? Is there areas, say if you're working in higher education, or if it's some other maybe big cultural projects, there is, everyone wants to do big museums, say. Maybe there's other projects which you get more satisfaction out of and they're less busy. I think and maybe go to build a reputation in those sectors. I think for like Heatherwick, even Foster's, in the early days, they didn't chase after those types of projects. Foster's especially were quite industrial. They were stuff which other people weren't doing.
Yeah.
The big, and actually they forged this whole new lens of architecture. And I think that's what's quite interesting, is when we break down out of all of the built environment, how much are actually, designed by architects. There's quite a lot which aren't. And you can probably make a lot more headway in doing small changes to large sheds keep popping up all over the UK. And you're like, some of them are soulless industrial estates. And you're like, surely that would be a lot more, enjoyable to try and make a small difference to that space compared to a luxury art museum, where you think, well, okay, it's nice, but is that really where I want to be working? Similarly with, the different sectors, I think where are the gaps is probably a big place to look, and not go to where everyone else is going. And actually you can have much more exciting conversations with people in those situations, because there aren't these organised competitions.
That's a really interesting point that you bring up. Yeah, obviously Foster's were, and same with RSHP and Grimshaw, and Hopkins. They were doing these sort of unusual industrial buildings that other architects weren't interested in.
Completely.
And that's where they were using their kind of, using it as an area to experiment, and were building out a reputation. That's a very interesting thought there.
Well, I think so. And some of touching on how you make those spaces more human friendly, people centric, doesn't have to be the whole site either. I mean, that's what's interesting. You could have large production spaces, but maybe there's some more people-focused areas. But I suppose it also comes back to what are you doing it for as well? Why are you bidding for those competitions? And actually, I find personally it's much more enjoyable actually building relationships and networking and growing relationships in other events, where it depends what you're focusing in on. But there's so many problems which people need help with. Like I say, at this stage, higher education is going through lots of challenges. There's some big university campuses which are doing amazing work, but they've got challenges with occupancy, student numbers going down, space. They've got too many buildings. They need to consolidate. They need to think about new ways of learning and teaching with the home working. There's sort of sector-specific focus, and there's loads of opportunities, and there's a really healthy community of people where they're wanting to make positive change in terms of sustainability, lowering energy usage, making big changes. I think you can be more proactive and go out and meet people and actually have that in mind. Equally, obviously, let's say transportation or ports, areas where ports are really challenging at the moment. They're very typically industrial. They don't have to be. Some of the best projects can be, in Sydney Opera House, walking down, to the marina. There's some lovely spaces. Everyone likes waterfront places. So, but I think often, and then sort of not engineer mindset, but just some of these places are built for throughput, built for development, and there's loads of opportunities there for architects to get in. And again, like you say, even now Foster's does team up with engineering on bridges, on airports, obviously, which is maybe a bit contentious, but the or large industrial complexes are still needed more than ever as the flow of trade is going, berserk.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about kind of the actual art of selling and negotiating and making sure that the fees are set well. And also, you mentioned a little bit earlier just about this idea of confidence. And obviously, we look at someone like Norman Foster and Thomas Heatherwick, and they're quite enigmatic figures in themselves. And I've heard the rumor of Norman Foster in the past, where obviously we know his kind of the drawing style at Foster's is very kind of iconic, and Narinder Sagu's sort of way of developing that. I've heard that I heard this wonderful story of it was a plane ride or something going off to a client pitch, and Norman Foster sat and he rehearsed the drawing that he was going to draw live inside of the client pitch. And it was, to kind of orchestrate a conversation was, kind of like, I've got an idea. And then he stands there and then does this live drawing. I don't know how much truth is in that, but I like the showmanship of it and the sort of romance about it. How much, kind of what's involved in the selling and negotiating process with a client? Because obviously it's actually, you're dealing with teams of people. It's not necessarily one person and another person. What kind of mechanics are involved in these kinds of agreements that get made, and and what sorts of negotiations? What does it look like?
I think that's fascinating, that way of looking at things. And actually, if you don't plan before the pitch or when you're coming to see the client, you don't always perform very well, really. And you come across as a bit bumbling, casual, and unorganized, which doesn't help anyone, especially a top CEO who's very busy, and you've got 15 minutes to make an impression, if that. So I think planning is clearly really, really important. I mean, I think this works for anyone in terms of we get a bit obsessed with, architects don't like selling, architects don't like marketing, architects don't like business development, and it's disgusting words. And no, but I think there's a different, you can position your team to their strengths as well. And I think one thing of not obsessing about those terms, but focusing on partnerships and building partnerships, I think is really important. And fundamentally, we're trying to build relationships with people in terms of selling, in terms of building trust with some person on the opposite side who you may or may not have known for a while. How quickly you can get to that trust situation so they buy with you, I think is fascinating. Thomas would often say we need 7 touches before you really will buy something from you, which I think you hear time and time again in various other business books. I think I wrote down, it ended up with P's for some reason, but partnership was one. Then there was like problems and challenge. And I think problems is interesting. If you listen or read, Donald Miller's written some amazing books, including Story Brand, where he positions things of understand what the client's problems are, what are their pain points, why would they, position it like that. I think some people don't care if you're 75 years of practice. Some people don't care. It's about how are you going to solve my problem now? And it could be the individual here or their team. And often, so I think if you position yourself to be, I can solve that problem. It's not even architecture in some ways. It's like, I am that trusted person who can build a team to solve that problem, whatever it is specifically. And we've identified it first, and then we break it down into its component parts really clearly. And then you start building out, obviously, the brief of the project and the purpose, which is the third P, strangely. And then this idea of practicing, of doing it and refining it, doing it better, constantly learning, constantly growing. And then you get your portfolio, which again was another P. But I couldn't do, it sounds really cheesy, but then you get a portfolio, which does matter. But I think that reinforces the wheel, because then you go to the next meeting and you say, well, I've just been in this meeting solving these problems for this person. He looks like you have exactly the same problems. Are there any others there? And we know how to solve those problems because here's the examples. You're not even talking about money yet, but you're talking about problem solving. And I feel that is the strongest position because, and something else I thought was quite nice, where you position the client as the hero in this whole piece, and you're the guide, again, solving their problem. You can be that wise, not having a big beard, but a Gandalf type character, or a guide, not Dumbledore. But in terms of Harry's the hero, the client's the hero, he doesn't quite know what he's doing. He's got a big risk on his shoulders to try and sort out this problem or development, whatever. And positioning it like that, they're in quite a nervous, stressful situation. They may lose their job if they don't deliver on time. The client may lose lots of money if they don't deliver. So recognizing that and then positioning yourself, you're not the hero, you're the guide. You can solve by giving them advice. You can solve their challenges because you've got all this wisdom which you can help them with. And actually that's really positive, because I think often you turn, in a sales situation, you can turn lots of people off if you come across as, I'm this, I've done this, I'm amazing, blah, 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 and actually they go, fuck off. I want to work with you. Often the more mature, experienced, sophisticated clients will know a lot of that, I think, and they almost can design the building, but they want something different as well. So this isn't a P, but I think admitting you don't know everything as well, and you're willing to learn and go on this journey with them, and it will be a pleasant journey. I think that's something Heavyweight do very well, is actually really nurture a client, really communicate very clearly, not in technical speak, but communicate really not simply but clearly to CEOs, and then display the designs very simply. Fosters as well, to be honest. There's definitely a sort of confidence in both camps. There's an ability to, we can deliver this, whatever it is, believe in us, we believe in ourselves. And there's a can-do attitude, was something I was always really impressed with Fosters. Very much, there was this drive to get stuff done. There was this ability to get stuff done. And the client was like, maybe sometimes a bit disorganized. They had this challenge. How do we get this over the line? Don't know. And actually often in the Middle East as well, some of the more recent experiences where Fosters would actually be the ones driving the projects forward and making sure the client was supported properly, especially if it was a startup client who had lots of new people in place, or people who disappeared and new ones came in. They were the ones arguably who held a lot of the knowledge. So I think that's fascinating. And then it's a natural conversation to get into once you've crossed the line from, you've built a relationship, you've built the trust step, you're then into they're like, well, it makes complete sense to work with you because you're so helpful. Of course I'm going to pay you. Of course I want to work with you. They make my life easy from the client's point of view. So I think if you can position yourself like that, it's then not necessarily, clearly there's then they have to go to free clients or free different people to get procurement right. But I think if you can justify your value then, you can justify, well, as I said at the start, you can maybe try and secure a small commission to really test it if you need more time to really build their full respect of you if there's any questions you have or they have about you, but over deliver in that first stage. And then it's just a no-brainer to move to the next stage, because by then you've probably defined the brief really clearly. And I think what's important is really showing that value of making sure the brief, the budget and the design vision are aligned by the end of stage 2 or concept design, and holding the client to account to say, well, you've got to sign that off. And be quite firm with them in a nice way, but just saying, for the project to be successful, we have, even on the biggest scale, we had this, the design didn't, or the brief didn't match the budget, which were both, it was a real challenge because of big stakeholder groups, and how you rectify that, I think, is a big discussion as well. And then the design vision will be what it will be, but that's a product in some ways of what they want in the building, what they want, how much money they have. And you need to not square, but get the triangle to work together and be aligned. And then you can obviously move more into the production stages and delivery and get all the other team members involved, building the engineering complexity, making sure it's costed and driven. But I think, so that would be my approach, I think. And then, just assessing if they're on the same journey, because some clients aren't. And I think they want just something good enough. And is that enough? And then there's always constraints with budget, sometimes very strict. So being realistic about that, getting that cost consultant involved quickly, early, sense checking if their budget's realistic, because often it can not be. The client did the budget 3 years ago, things have changed, we've gone up with the market changes, or it was just done badly. And that can cause huge stress on the projects, and the project fails, not for your problem or the architect's hard work, it's because it hasn't been set up properly. And I think all those questions, again, you can be a guide in that sense and saying, well, this budget's not realistic. And I think two roles which work well is where you have this, either a project manager or design manager role, and then the design architect working side by side. And I see that can work quite nicely, where the design leader partner can drive the design forward, keep a positive relationship. The partner who's a sort of a design manager or project manager can push forward on the more commercial side, the project management stuff, the wider team issues, like why aren't the engineers appointed? Why isn't the cost consultant on board? Why haven't you signed off these decisions? We've got all this information we need sorted out, we're waiting for, and that's holding us up. And how you can keep that sort of more process project management steps going, and then the architect can stay positive, have a really positive discussion with the client. You're still the same team, but you can split out the meetings, and often you have the client side, you can have someone sign off the design vision, someone sign off the budget, and then someone delivering it, and then so you can mark different teams quite
so
well like that.
So interesting. So is that, like, you're dealing with multi-headed client teams here, and actually, your own team internally is kind of split up and to different parts, dealing with different parts of the client at that scale.
That's right.
With your work now at Ridge and Partners, and you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, some of the, you're taking a different approach here, because it's you don't have the same signature brand as Foster's or Heatherwick, or it's not like a lead, it's not Starchitect. What sorts of approaches have you found that are different that you're using at Ridge and Partners, and that that are more kind of innovative, if you like?
I think it's been a fascinating experience, because you can almost rewind to when Foster's first started, when they didn't have a brand, when they didn't have a name, and just think, well, and track back to those projects. But over delivering and doing them, almost you come back to basics. You strip out the brand, you strip out that, you just focus on what makes a good project for that specific situation, and do the best work you can. And I think that is where often there's a bit of a gap, because you can surprise the clients as well by over delivering, showing them something they weren't expecting. Use some of the tools and techniques you've gathered over the from the bigger practices and what they might be doing, the lessons of what has been a successful project. And but I think it comes down to also just being realistic that the budgets may be lower, the fees may be lower, but actually you can still deliver great projects. And that piece I said about, with breaking the project up, it seems to be quite common into small steps and almost starting. And often, especially in the team in London, we're building a portfolio of work, and it's how that works. And Richard in certain sectors has a really well-developed name, such as in motorsport and various other areas.
Right.
So there's certain projects, science and technology as well as higher education. So you can dip into those experiences. And I think it's a different offer in many cases, because you're not just focusing on design, you are focusing on delivery as well. And it's not the right for every client, but you can show awareness to this multi-headed, multidisciplinary approach and offer, in a way, a slightly different offer to people, because it's not just focused on design, but it's saying, well, you'll get a really well-designed project, but it will be well project managed. It will also consider sustainability. It will consider all the specialisms, because they could be talked to bring into this project. So it's, again, I think it's de-risking the projects for clients. So, but then at the end of the day, if you can show some really nice projects as well, that's great. And I think that's what's coming through now. And time again, with having clients saying those projects and those designs are really, really great. And they look good, they deliver the brief, and they're hitting the budget. So it's almost a win-win. It's not really, it's an interesting challenge. You've got to work within the constraints of the project, and arguably those are better design challenges sometimes than an unlimited budget. And I think the focus, I wouldn't say it's easy. It's definitely been difficult, because you haven't got a constant stream of projects coming down. And I think that's something where Heatherwick and the Fosters are. There's a lot more work coming down the pipeline, but it's also satisfying by you're trying to generate the work, you're trying to build the relationships, and you're actually having some ways more authentic conversations, because or more rewarding conversations, because you've created that opportunity, and then when you are delivering, it's a more personal situation. But I think still the tools and the approach is exactly the same, really, in terms of really defining your value, and like we touched on just now, how you go through that process, which is something which is fascinating. And I think constantly trying to communicate clearly, as I say, to raise the profile, because all companies change. Ridge is changing massively, and it's going in a really positive direction. And it's not the same company it was last year or the year before. And it's almost, we're constantly refining our collateral. We're looking at different approaches, learning and what's working, what's successful, what isn't successful. We lost out against Hawkins Brown recently, which was actually a really good experience, because we're up talking to them, in the same conversation, and that's fascinating. And we took that as a major win, thinking, well, actually, we've developed, honed our skills and tone skills for that specific opportunity. Now, what's next? Let's keep going, and there's a real momentum building. And I think that's what gets exciting, when you realise even if you lose, you're winning, because you're gaining, you're growing, and you're constantly refining it. I think what's been exciting for me as well is it's building this really exciting young team, especially in the London office. We've I think it's 16 people at the moment, which is quite good. There's some people who've come across from Foster's, actually, so there's a common understanding of the design approach. But then there's younger architects and associates who are coming up, assistants, and there's focusing on that. What can we do as a startup practice in a larger practice is quite exciting, and the different challenges you face. And I've really enjoyed just helping the younger architects progress through as well, and learn and grow, and the sort of sharing knowledge from, like we've talked about today, and then thinking, well, what's right for us isn't right for a Foster's, but there's lots of things at Foster's which wasn't necessary. If we had full control, would we have done it like that? Maybe not. So there's an autonomy, in a sense, to the work we're doing now, which I think is really liberating and exciting in that sense. Especially, you feel more you've got more investment in the process, if that makes sense. And you're not a small cog in a big wheel. You're you can help the machine work in different ways. But as I said at the start, I think it's not easy. I think the climate at the moment is difficult. The competition is very high. You've got to always have built this resilience to keep going and not get too emotionally attached if you fail, because failing, you're obviously learning, first attempts and learning and all that. And I think it's, building that resilience. That what we were focusing on last year was building the portfolio out. That's really helped us now when we're moving to the next year. And I think there's now a really positive momentum going. And then that looking out, as I said at the start, of the mental health of the team and making sure they're not burning too hot and they are taking breaks. And when pressure's coming on, they're getting support. I think that side of the team dynamic is really important, that you can, because you can't do everything clearly, and how you split up the roles between you and do business development, but also delivery. And there's a partner I work with, Simon Mason, came across from Foster's. He largely leads the design process and the quality, and then I'm more on business development and the commercial. So it's quite a balanced team. And as I said, that sort of project management, design management piece. So there's a balance there. And then under us, we've got a big sort of good support team of 3 senior associates who are very good, very capable design, but also really fascinated in winning more work and learning. And then there's another sort of layer. So it's quite well structured, even though it's quite a small team. And I think we've got quite a lot of resilience now already. And then it's interesting debates having at the moment. And I remember I popped in to see White Red Architects, Vicky, who I know you've interviewed.
Yeah.
We were talking about the valley of death or something, where if you grow past 20, maybe before, if you're targeting trying to get to 50, it can get difficult because you have all the support functions and your turnover can suffer as you're professionalizing. So there's some interesting debates about, is growth right for everyone? And will you then also have to have the mouths to feed situation, because you've got to obviously secure more work? So there's a balance. Or do you focus on just staying focused on your team size and do the best quality projects possible, and you can still earn good money, but because you're being more selective on what you're choosing? But actually, as you get to, go to the next stage, it gets more, you get more systems in place, you've got to professionalize more. And not to say we haven't got that at Ridge, because it's a larger sort of entity as well, but it's how you interface in with that in some ways. But I know it seems there is a challenging sort of space when you get larger. And we debated that at Heatherwick as well. Should we get more than 200 people? Foster's has grown to sort of 1,600 people plus, and it's like the challenges there are even more extreme in some ways, but it's split up into smaller teams. But you still have that, or you have to keep coping with where's the work coming from. And I think how you balance off, especially if you've started working on projects, how those projects can all stop. So you've got to balance keeping the pipeline going clearly and keeping opportunities ticking over and relationships, just in case your current pipeline stops. So that's another tension and balance. So it is a fascinating moving, agenda all the time. Yeah.
Amazing. I think that's probably a good place for us to conclude the conversation now. I can see I was just lost. I lost track of time there. I was enjoying just listening. Absolutely brilliant, Andy. Really. So I really appreciate your time today and sharing. And sharing those insights and your expertise. There's still loads more that I want to ask. So maybe we'll have another one of these at a later date. But thank you so much for your time today. That was really, really insightful.
No problem. Enjoyed it. It was great.
And that's a wrap. And one more thing, if you haven't already, please do head on over to iTunes or Spotify and leave us a review. We'd love to read your name out here on the show, and we'd love to get your feedback, and we'd love to hear what it is that you'd like to see more of and what you love about the show already. This episode is sponsored by Smart Practice, Business of Architecture's flagship program to help you structure your firm for freedom, fulfillment, and financial profit. If you want access for our free training on how to do this, please visit smartpracticemethod.com. businessofarchitecture.com. Or if you want to speak directly to one of our advisors about how we might be able to help you, please follow the link in the information. Hello, listeners. We hope you're enjoying our show. We love bringing you these insightful conversations, but we couldn't do it without the support of our amazing sponsors. If you're a business owner or know someone who would be an excellent fit for our audience, we'd love to hear from you. Partnering with us means your brand will reach over 40,000 engaged listeners each month. Interested in becoming a sponsor? Please send us an email at support@businessofarchitecture.com. The views expressed on this show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract bond, or commitment except to help you be unstoppable.